11,000 people were in attendance for a doll release. Felicity's launch was absolutely over the top in the best way, and completely tone deaf in another. So let me explain. So before we get to Felicity, let's set the scene. I, like many children of the 80s and 90s, was first introduced to American Girl, or as it was known in the quaintness of the 20th century, the American Girls Collection by Pleasant Company, when I was 9 years old. One sunny afternoon in the mid-90s, an illicit piece of mail arrived at my house. Its large, glossy paper and vibrant imagery drew me in. It begged for me to rifle through its pages, and rifle I did. I sat alone in the front room, poring over page after page of things my 9-year-old brain couldn't have conceived. And then it happened. My first centerfold. A true-to-life photo of an 18-inch doll that could be mine for a mere $82. Oh. At the realization of the substantial financial investment one of these dolls would require, I put down my catalog, tucked away that mental wish list, and thought little of the American Girls collection for a very, very long time. So you may ask yourself then, who am I to be making a video on this topic? What are my credentials? You want my credentials? I've been making up for lost time. That's better. Well, I don't have any credentials, but I do have Google, and I do have lots of opinions. In all fairness, I am by no means new to the world of American Girl or Pleasant Company. However, I was not a Pleasant Company child. I didn't experience the heyday of epic releases or get to experience that anticipation of waiting for the next catalog to arrive. And spoiler, when we didn't order something from the first catalog that they sent, they never sent another one, so rude? So I'm still catching up on the happenings and lore of early American Girl and Pleasant Company, which is why we're here today. But first, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the timeline, let me catch you up. American Girl, as we know it today, was the brainchild of Pleasant Rowland, who conceived the idea of a doll and storybook series that would highlight girls specifically at different points in American history. This idea famously came to Roland in 1984 during her first visit to Colonial Williamsburg. According to Roland, she sent a postcard from Williamsburg to her friend Valerie Tripp, who would later go on to author many of the original character books for Pleasant Company, telling her of the idea and asking her opinion. And thus the seeds of what we would come to know as Pleasant Company, a mail-order company based out of Wisconsin, which would do more than $300 million in sales before being sold less than 15 years later to Mattel for $700 million, had been planted, as the first shipment of catalogs found their way to mailboxes across the US in the fall of 1986. And yes, you heard me right. $300 million in sales before it was purchased by Mattel in 1998 for $700 million. That's a pretty chunk of change. So while Roland herself is a very inspiring figure who does not lack for accomplishments, there are 2 points that seem to go unaddressed when discussing the history of American Girl and Pleasant Company, and they're extremely important, especially when discussing Felicity. So 1, Pleasant Company was a business founded by a businesswoman for the sake of doing business. At the time of its founding, Pleasant Rowland invested $1.2 million of her own money, which she amassed from textbook royalties, into the company. This was not a woman pulling herself up by her bootstraps to accomplish her dreams. She and her husband had both generated their own fortunes, and while that doesn't discount her accomplishments, it did skew the way that she told her stories moving forward, the way that history was told through the lens of Pleasant Company as a business. Number 2, Roland had been afforded a rather affluent upbringing, which, again, may have helped to color how she marketed and exactly to whom it was that she was marketing. Roland wrote in very flowery prose of those inspiration for the American Girls collection in a letter to parents, which was featured on the back of a Pleasant Company catalog in 1991. And she spoke very openly in the letter about how she used to pore over her parents' wedding photos and dream of one day becoming a bride. And she also spoke of the way that she would stare at the photo from their honeymoon. The photo was in Williamsburg. So that romanticization of her parents, of their love story, with Colonial Williamsburg as the actual backdrop for the culmination of their story on their honeymoon, I think definitely helped to set the tone for this very early romanticization of a period that actually was quite polarizing in a lot of ways that Pleasant Company, through Felicity's world, does not bother exploring. So that's number 2. In her letter, she reminisces of her experience visiting Colonial Williamsburg for the first time as a corporate wife. Her words, not mine. In 84, as she accompanied her husband on a business trip, Roland paints an idyllic scene of Williamsburg as she observed it seated under an arbor, as she mused to herself, wondering how she could bring Colonial Williamsburg to life for kids. So here's the thing. If Williamsburg was of such great importance to Pleasant Rowland and the very genesis of Pleasant Company, then why, you may ask, wasn't the company launched in 1986 with a character from Williamsburg, the bustling, affluent East Coast town Roland had held in such high regard since her own girlhood? Why did Pleasant wait until 1991 to release her Williamsburg character, Felicity Merriman? Well, in 1986, the first catalog launched 3 characters. Kirsten Larson, a Swedish immigrant settling in the Minnesota Territory with her family in 1854, Samantha Parkington, a young lady of high society in 1904 New York, and Molly McIntyre of turnip-hating fame. If you know, you know. From 1944 Illinois. Well, these first 3 characters and their collections did successfully help to launch the company, they were rather historically anachronistic in some ways, likely due to resource allocation. See, the dolls were produced by Goetz, a West German doll company, and Pleasant basically sourced the materials that Goetz had available. They didn't really make much in the way of new materials for them. So those adorable but completely historically inaccurate pie bangs on your Kirsten doll, or on mine, you can thank the mother of invention for that. Necessity. Because it was necessary that when starting the collection, Roland utilized existing products by other manufacturers. She was in the publishing and marketing game, not the manufacturing game. At least not yet. So what does all this have to do with Felicity already? Well, do you think with Roland's deep love and long-time romanticization of Colonial Williamsburg, pre- and Revolutionary War American history, that she would offer up her dream doll to budget cuts? No. No, she waited. She waited until Pleasant Company had an established fan base and clientele. She was, after all, a businesswoman. So she waited until she could properly design her colonial dream doll without pesky budgetary constraints to introduce Miss Merriman to the world. And oh my gosh, did it show. While the first 3 characters were incredibly successful, there was no ticket tape parade for their release. Because it wasn't their release like we know doll releases today. It was the launch of an entire company and new IPs. For Felicity, however, it was a no-holds-barred event. And that, my friends, is what we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to take a trip down memory lane to the absolute insane release of Felicity Merriman through the eyes of Felicity's elegant tea party. Boy, do I have a treat for you.
25 years ago, in the summer of 1991, I spent some time in Williamsburg, Virginia with my mother.
So not only did Roland throw her new doll a party, she also produced a VHS of said party, which at 26 minutes in length could be yours for a mere $22 in 1991. I came across this time capsule while I was doing research for a different video, and I am just so grateful. It is possibly the most absurdly 90s time capsule I have ever seen. It's up there with the Welcome to the Internet tutorials, which have been reacted to by YouTube demigods like Drew Gooden. I mean, this thing is peak 90s.
Then, as now, the town of Williamsburg looked very much as it did in 1774, when men like George Washington, Patrick Henry, and Thomas Jefferson walked those same streets. But I wasn't in Williamsburg to learn about them. I was there to attend a most unusual and unforgettable event. Felicity's Elegant Tea Party.
So this is a stellar example of the basic historical bait and switch that Pleasant Company and American Girl have loved to play with their audience. You think it's educational, but really we're just here to sell you something, and we've labeled it educational so you feel better about your purchase. Pleasant used to refer to the educational value of her line as chocolate cake with vitamins, which I think is a very concise and accurate description.
Learning about Felicity and exploring Williamsburg was a bit like stepping into the past to see what life had been like more than 200 years before I was born.
I find it a bit funny that there's this continued emphasis on Felicity's Williamsburg, because they really do a great job of cherry picking what does and doesn't belong in this very sanitized representation of Colonial Williamsburg. Because, for example, in the 18th century, 52% of the population of Colonial Williamsburg were Black people, and the vast majority of them were enslaved to white families. But somehow, there is very, very little reference to any of that in her materials, and it's definitely historical fiction, people. It's been stated by former Pleasant Company staffers that Roland didn't like anything dark or edgy and liked to focus attention on girliness. And I theorize that this perspective disdain for anything unsavory at times affected the historical accuracy of Pleasant Company's historical narratives far more than budgetary constraints ever did. So there were a lot of little things in the gift box the girls received. There was a poster of Felicity, there was a gift bag with Felicity on it, there was a craft kit so that girls could make their own little sachet. There was a map of Felicity's world, and that's where the whole thing gets me. So Felicity's world is basically the exhibit of Colonial Williamsburg as it stood in 1985. So we go back to our Pleasant timeline. In 1984, Pleasant Rowland contacted Valerie Tripp about the idea for Pleasant Company and the American Girls collection. In 1985, Valerie Tripp authors a book called An Introduction to Williamsburg. So An Introduction to Williamsburg, which was published by Pleasantry Press, so we can guess who that was owned by. It's the only publication to ever be published by Pleasantry Press. The only ISBN number that I could find associated with that company. It was copywritten in 1985 and published in 1991. It was made available at Felicity's event, and you could also order it through the Pleasant Company catalogs. That is basically the blueprint for Felicity's Williamsburg. It is a very white, sanitized version of Williamsburg that excludes historically Black locations like the Black Congregational Church in Williamsburg and the Williamsburg Bray School, which was a school specifically for free and enslaved Black children of Williamsburg. This is all according to Colonial Williamsburg's own historians. And the function of the school, according to Williamsburg, was to educate young Black slaves, make them more useful, again, to their enslavers. But also, if they were educated in the Anglican faith, it was thought that it would make them more obedient as slaves. They could not find a replacement teacher after the death of Anne Wager in November of 1774. So this school was very much a part of Williamsburg at the time, and that was left out of Felicity's Williamsburg, even though it was very much open until November of 1774. The Bray School was not made a part of the Williamsburg exhibit until the 90s. That's what I was able to find out in my research. However, it was very much a known part of Colonial Williamsburg's written history. So the exclusion of that is very strange. So according to a Washington Post article that I found from 1991 that talked about Pleasant Company and Felicity's Elegant Tea Party, there were 24 sittings for this event. And those 24 sittings actually made up for the largest attendance that Colonial Williamsburg had ever had for a single event. So according to this article, the tickets for girls were $50 each, and then it was an extra $35 for a parent, and then $50 to get into the historic area. The mother who was profiled in this article stated that she planned to spend $400 in total for the lodging, the tickets for her girls, gas, everything. $400 in 1991. That equals... But according to the article by the Washington Post, there were nearly 6,000 girls in attendance and 5,800 parents. And from the footage that is included in the Elegant Tea Party VHS, it does seem that it was an exclusively female event, which for myself is a really strange thing. I was raised by a single dad. So there's this very prescriptive sort of marketing and branding that Pleasant Company did, where everything was geared towards the mother-daughter dynamic. And personally, I didn't know what that was. Specific branding of this is a mother-daughter event, this is a mother-daughter collection, this is a mother-daughter experience was very isolating to a child like myself who did not have a doting mother. I had a doting father. So that being said, had I been in the ballpark to go to this, had I asked my dad to go to it and we were able to, I know he would have gone with me. He loved being Mr. Mom. He still loves being Mr. Mom, so.
City Books, Valerie Tripp. So early the next morning, I went to the auditorium where she was answering questions.
I really like doing the research, getting all the information about Williamsburg and 1774 and 1775. I enjoy that part. That's fun.
Okay, are you sure about that last part? Because you kind of missed half the population. Can you imagine the story if you got rid of, like, any other population? Like, what if you got rid of all of the women? Who would we meet on the cover of that book? Hey, how's it going? Oh, hey. How's the writing going? I'm just having a hard time figuring out what to write about. There's just not much I can reference. This is it. What about that big old stack of books over there labeled Colonial Williamsburg Research? No. Can't use that. Can't use it. Well, why not use it? It's right here. You got what? There's one on the Peyton House, one on the production of tobacco in Colonial Williamsburg, and the Williamsburg Bray School. I said no. Nope. Can't. It's not. Nope. Not. Nope. Not. Can't use. No. But why? It's not pleasant. Okay, so they spend like 20 seconds maybe going over the showcase for Felicity, and that's insane. Like, the whole event is built around the fact that this is a new character. There have only been 3 characters so far. The company has been around for 5 years at this point. They're introducing their first new character. And so much time, money, and energy has gone into the planning of this doll and her collection, as historically inaccurate as some of those things may be. And they treat her showcase like it's an afterthought, when this is what these little girls came out for. They didn't come out to go to a tea. They didn't come out to see adults talk about adult things. They came to see the doll they want to ask for Christmas. And that was something you could do at the event. They had the holiday catalog featuring Felicity there at the event, so you could pre-order your Felicity and her collection. It's just ridiculous how they treat this like the afterthought in the video. But yeah. Basically, the weird thing about Pleasant Company is because Pleasant Company was so expensive, they had to market in a way that really pandered to parents, basically, and made the parents feel like they were better for buying this heirloom quality doll for their child. It wasn't necessarily about the child's enjoyment always. Not to say that kids didn't enjoy these dolls, because they absolutely did. But I've also heard from people who were essentially given these dolls against their will and did not want them, and were dressed up in historical garb and didn't want to be. And this was just their parents treating them like human dolls. So yeah, I think a lot of that went into the marketing and the branding and the way that Pleasant would write letters to parents on the back of the catalogs. and try and essentially bring the adults into the fold and make a lot of the experience about them and making them feel in some way morally superior for buying an expensive educational toy for their child, because the expensive educational toy essentially would set up their child for greater things. And it's like, or you could just watch Sesame Street like I did, but and again, I say this as someone who absolutely loves the world that Pleasant created. I'm just obviously fascinated by the way that these things were marketed and the life that Pleasant Company and American Girl has lived out long after Pleasant departed from the company itself. So yeah, anyway, you got to get the parents involved and feeling good about themselves for making a purchasing decision if you're going to spend hundreds of dollars on dolls.
Later that morning, my mom and I discovered that more than 11,000 people from all across the country had come to Williamsburg to attend Felicity's elegant tea party.
Yeah, you heard that right. 11,000 people were in attendance for this event. I found out that little nugget of information when I was researching a different video for my channel, and that was what got me hooked. And I just thought, with everything that I know about American Girl, how have I never come across this before? And I've never seen anyone talk about the event before. So that was what drew me in, because I've been to the American Girl place on the day of a new doll's release before, and not a lot of fanfare, at least for the one that I went to. So the fact that 11,000 people came out for a doll release was absolutely incredible. Basically, because our media is so specialized now, like there's not, now that we have YouTube and we have all these streaming services and everything and TikTok and anything else, everyone's entertainment is now individualized. I've been having a discussion with someone recently about the lack of cultural touch points in our current society, and that we don't really have these things that we gather over. So when I saw that 11,000 people had come out for a doll release from like all 50 states to Colonial Williamsburg, this was something I needed to know everything about. And now you know it too. Okay, so now we're entering the fashion show and tea portion of the program, with which, absent the footmen, I'm intimately familiar. The tea party and fashion show is not a format that is unique to this event whatsoever. I grew up attending teas like this from the age of about 3, but here's the thing. So I was usually the kid going to these things because I liked adults and the company of my grandmother. I liked that there were rules for how adults engaged. I was an undiagnosed neurodiverse kid, and all of those strict social rules of etiquette acted as the perfect guide for what to do and what to expect. But I can't imagine the classmates I had surviving an actual tea at that age. All the table manners and sitting still and not getting to scream randomly just 'cause. That's no place for a child.
The moment we'd all been waiting for had finally arrived.
Hello, I'm Pleasant Rowland, the president and founder of Pleasant Company.
I'm sorry, but this cracks me up. No, this was not the moment you've been waiting for. The moment you were waiting for happened back in the showcase. That's the girl that we came to meet. I'm sorry, but no child attending this event was more excited to listen to a middle-aged CEO wax philosophical than they were to meet a new doll.
8 years ago, in this very place, that the idea of the American Girls collection was born. Here is where I dreamed up the idea of a group of 9-year-old heroines who would teach girls of today about history, about the history of our wonderful country, and also about the history of themselves, of the experiences of girlhood that have lasted for hundreds of years, experiences of family and friendship and feeling that have linked mother to daughter for generations. At a time when the world has somehow grown too sour and cynical, I am so gratified to know that you and thousands like you appreciate the American Girls collection and have come from so far across our country to reaffirm its values. Thank you so very much.
So this speech and the way that it's framed by the narrator really makes it feel like this is the main attraction. Like even the point in the VHS runtime at which Pleasant shows up to give her speech signals this is the main attraction. This is what you came here for. Not that doll that the event was named after. No, the way this is framed, this is all about Pleasant Rowland. It's about her accomplishments and welcoming Pleasant Company's most fanatic followers into the fold, with Roland personally at one of her favorite places. Now, launching a woman-owned company without celebrity or brand recognition is and was a huge accomplishment and deserves to be celebrated. Good for her. But the speech never tells us anything new about Felicity or her development, unless that was left on the cutting room floor for some reason, but I don't know why it would be. So it's about the company, it's about Roland's vision and values and this very prescriptive brand of girlhood upon which she built her company, which is consistently on display throughout the video. This prescriptive brand of girlhood and the focus on the mother-daughter relationship, it's so important to Pleasant that she doesn't make room for other types of families in her branding or marketing, which, as someone raised by a single dad, always stung. The especially high regard Pleasant places on the mother-daughter relationship is reinforced over and over throughout the narrative of this 26-minute tape, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. And in the 90s, this sort of messaging was already falling out of favor, but Pleasant, well, as a businesswoman, set herself generations ahead from a personal vantage, seemed to be stuck in a bygone era. And all in all, it is a bit strange to me that she seemed to have made herself the focal point of all of this. So now we are solidly in the fashion show portion of the video. In this clip, you can see Felicity getting placed into a stay. A lot of us are more familiar with corsets, and a stay is basically that. You would start wearing one when you were about 2 years old and supposed to promote good posture, but also a pleasing silhouette. I'm sorry, but to whom is a child's silhouette supposed to be pleasing? But the best part about this is that they also made the stay, so the corset, and the undergarments for your doll. You could have your little interior pocket and a corset for your 18-inch Felicity doll. And I have to admit, as someone who loves historical fashion, this is at the top of my Felicity wish list. I think it is just so cool that they made this for dolls. It's so ridiculous and over the top, and I love it. So, I'm not perfect.
As the fashion show continued, we met lots of different characters who were part of Felicity's world. We also discovered that you can learn a lot about people, like who they are, what they do, and how they live just by observing their clothes.
Okay, this is such a wild statement to me. If you're 9 years old and you've never noticed before that, like, your school nurse and the clown at your cousin's birthday party both wear, like, brightly patterned clothes, but the similarities end there, I can't even begin to fathom the layers of bubble you lived in. Like, how is this something that you were learning at, like, 9-10 years old? It's just kind of a ridiculous statement. I'm sorry. Now, what if the clown and the nurse switched costumes? That would make for a much more interesting cavity filling.
After we learned about the people and fashions from Felicity's time, Valerie Tripp introduced the play she wrote especially for Felicity's Elegant Tea Party.
Like the colonies, Felicity was full of potential and energy and a great will to grow and learn. And like the colonies, Felicity was going to have to decide what kind of character she was going to be, independent and with a will of her own, or obedient. Like the colonies, Felicity wanted to be independent, and like the colonies, she was going to have to learn that independence doesn't come easily. It has to be earned. And with independence comes responsibility for yourself and for your world.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so I know what she's trying to say. She was trying to draw a smart parallel between the attitude of her protagonist, Felicity, and the attitude of the colonies, but this just boils me. I'm sorry, but the fact that Felicity's World commits an erasure of enslaved persons while talking about how the colonists and Felicity want their independence. So really the responsibility of Pleasant Company in the 80s and early 90s, prior to Addie's release, was to tell white American history to white, solidly middle class and upper class American families in a way that would make them feel welcomed into the story and not feel like the story was a personal affront to them or their ancestry. If their family settled here early, it wasn't an attack on them by telling the truth. That was the role of Pleasant Company, was to tell a pleasant version of white American history, which meant the erasure of a lot of things that early settlers did. They wanted to leave out all of the controversial parts that, might make you uncomfy, because uncomfiness doesn't sell expensive dolls. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Like, Pleasant Company was a lifestyle. You could have dresses to match your dolls. You could have nightgowns to match your dolls. You could have a carrying basket to take your doll back and forth with you to your grandma's house or your auntie's house or whatever. And if you're going to sell this upscale heirloom quality doll accessories products complete collection for $995, people are going to be less likely to put money into something that makes them feel uncomfy. And that's all there is to it. So they took out the uncomfy parts.
In the play, which is based on the book Felicity Learns a Lesson, you'll see Felicity make a tough choice, a choice that could end a friendship, but one that teaches her an important lesson about independence.
So now they launch into the play, which is based on the second book that wasn't in the welcome basket, and features additional outfits and accessories that are available to order at the event through the holiday catalog that was available there. This is the real crux of Roland's business model, as she explained in 2002 to CNN. She said, "I knew the books had to have stories so good that the reader would fall in love with the character. If she loved the character, she would want the doll. If she had the doll, she would want the clothes and accessories to play out the stories. If she played out the stories, she would want more books." So showing a play written by Valerie Tripp that told the story of the second book, that introduced new additional costumes and accessories that you could buy for your doll or buy the girl size version, that was, all part of the marketing. It wasn't just, let's learn about history. It was very specifically an extended advertisement. This event reminds me a lot of an infomercial, right? It has infomercial energy. They have a narrator for the fashion show and for the play, and then you have the narrator for the VHS itself, and they kind of like tie everything together for you, as they should. But then there's this very obvious advertisement of like, oh, for $19.95 if you order now. So in your Felicity box, in your Felicity gift box that you received at registration, there was an order form for Felicity's Elegant Tea, the VHS, 26 minutes for $22.
Finally, it was our turn to practice taking and serving tea properly.
Guess what else you could buy? The teacups. Okay, so I will admit, these foods look fine. A lot of my palate was decided by the high teas that I attended growing up. I started going to high teas when I was about 3 years old, and I attended them all throughout my schooling until I was like 17 or 18. It was this very warm, predictable environment that I was extremely used to, and I knew how to comport myself in a way in which was pleasing to both my grandmother and her friends. Those teas introduced me to tea sandwiches, which have become a lifelong obsession of mine. Cucumber tea sandwiches are, to this day, one of my favorite foods. I could eat those all day long. If I wouldn't develop a vitamin deficiency from only eating cucumber tea sandwiches, I would just eat cucumber tea sandwiches every day, all day, for the rest of my life. So while Pleasant Company did later release recipe books for the historical characters to include Felicity, Those didn't come out until 1994. And much to my chagrin, Felicity's book does not include the pastries that we see in this VHS. I would have loved to have been able to recreate some of the foods that are in her VHS. However, that's not what the recipes are. I will, however, be cooking my way through that cookbook over the next few weeks, so please check back in for that.
Before we left, Miss Manderly taught us how to make a proper courtesy. It was the perfect ending to a perfect party.
Are we ready? All right. I shall count. 1, 2, 3. Good day. Very well done. Very well done indeed.
So prior to this, I had never heard of a curtsy being referred to as a courtesy. And this is a very different fashion of, I'm going to say curtsy. This is a very different fashion of curtsy than I learned growing up. So you say you want to see a curtsy. So you take your front foot, you're going to do a circle behind you, and then basically melt into the floor until it hurts a lot. Curtsies or courtesies, however we're to say them for the time and the particular group, are going to vary based off of the clothing of the time. Felicity's clothing would have had more structure. First of all, the structure of the stay, but also the side pockets that poofed out her dress. Those would have added additional structure that may have made it harder to do the very low curtsy that I learned growing up. I'm still a fan of my curtsy because you're basically kissing the floor by the time you've done it properly. So I don't know what Mrs. Manderly would have thought of that, but there we are.
In fact, when I think of all the experiences I shared with my mom as I was growing up, this is one of my favorites. That's why I'm going to Williamsburg today with my daughter. I want her to meet Felicity, to see the beautiful town she grew up in, and to learn about American history in the same way I did.
There are a couple things that you really can't escape in this video. One is because it's done with a first-person narrator. First, I love the gall of this company to make a video that's supposed to be set in 2016, because this is supposed to be the girl looking back 25 years later, right? Obviously, I viewed this a few times at its full runtime. They personify the girl specifically as a white girl with a white mother, is othering to groups. Everything is mother and daughter, also othering to other family structures. Felicity's elegant tea party. What are my thoughts? I think it is very indicative of the 90s. I think it's especially indicative of someone who was brought up in the 1940s and 50s trying to engage with the 90s. I never want to discount what she achieved. She set up a multi-million-dollar company that was, I think, 80% female run in the 80s. And she did it again without any celebrity or brand, recognition. She has built it from the ground up, and that is a huge accomplishment. Just because we love something and we can appreciate it doesn't mean that we can't also find faults and constructively criticize. And that being said, I hope that if these videos are up in 20 years, that someone is critiquing me for how archaic I was for the time. Because that's the thing, is that we're always, when we're doing a retrospective, when we're looking back and critiquing something, we're doing it with gained knowledge from that vantage point. And, I'm doing the best with what I can in 2025. And I believe that Roland was doing the best that she could with what she knew in 1991. And I will be doing a separate video on why Felicity matters in 2025. So anyway, this is the first video in a series of, it's going to be either 4 or 5 video essays chronicling Felicity, her design, her educational materials, her world, the branding, all the things. So this is the first video. I'm still outlining and writing everything else. If you're not already following my Instagram, please do. Basically, I just sent out a poll to people who volunteered to participate through my Instagram to get some feedback on their experiences with American Girl and Pleasant Company over the years, and that's information that I will be including in the videos moving forward, because I am only one person with one experience, and I want to best represent and take into consideration the experience of other people and the way that they've engaged with this line throughout the years. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me today. A particular thank you to my family for putting up with me while I endure a new hyperfixation on Colonial Williamsburg. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.